I think that there is a very definite place in our security policy for incapacitating agents. And it's a humanitarian thing, not something that should be considered evil.
The Geneva Protocol prohibits the use of potentially lethal chemical weapons. This includes chemical incapacitating agents. But the U.S. government did not ratify the treaty until 1975. Despite such surprising revelations about the use of chemical agents, the main mission of SOG was supposedly reconnaissance. Running recon in a triple canopy forest with the enemy all around was tough, even for men in their physical prime. Anything that moved, even civilians, was considered a probable enemy. Seen here for the first time ever on television, the only known moving pictures of a secret SOG mission in action. An extraction high in the hills of Laos. It's almost impossible to see the SOG team hidden underneath the dense foliage. Under constant fire, SOG teams would be extracted by helicopter on dangling ropes, shaky ladders, and contraptions called stabo rings.
Let's get the hell out of here. Okay, talk to me, we're coming out.
From 1966, as the conventional war heated up, so did the unconventional cross-border secret war. But increasingly, team leaders found their recon missions compromised, detected immediately.
At times we had more than 100% casualties in a single year. That means every single man was killed, wounded, or missing in action.
Today, General Singlov admits the detection was sometimes the goal.
That's what you do when you send out a reconnaissance patrol. You go put some bait out there and wait for the enemy to fire on him. Then you know where the enemy is.
SOG teams were often bait, intentionally used to locate enemy troops and to draw them out of hiding. The next phase, to hammer the enemy with air attack. Sometimes SOG teams got hammered as well.
When we did lose an American out in Laos and were unable to recover his body, typically the following day there would be a B-52 strike on the location where he was last seen.
Tell us for what reason there'd be a B-52 strike there.
I can only tell you what I was told, which is if assumed dead or assumed captured, there was retribution, and secondly, they didn't want the American to be captured for political purposes, and that paraded in front of news cameras and the issue of our being in a third country exposed.
30 years later, it's still an explosive charge. The general overseeing Army Special Forces training, himself a SOG Vietnam vet, claims airstrikes were never intended to take American lives.
And the standard practice was to make every effort to recover an individual, whether he was MIA or KIA. Now, obviously you get to a certain point. For example, if you have someone who's missing in action, when tactically it's just no longer feasible to get into an area because of enemy disposition and so forth. And then, maybe it's not at all unlikely that because of large masses of the enemy, there may have been some sort of airstrike that was done on a fairly surgical basis against definable targets.
General Singlov is just one of several U.S. officials who confirmed that SOG losses were considered acceptable casualties of war. The soldiers of SOG knew the odds against them.
They understood that there would be times when they might be asked to survive a B-52 strike rather than run the risk of positive capture.
And at least someplace along the chain of command below you, they were told that this would happen.
I'm sure that's true.
So what would likely happen to a SOG team caught underneath the B-52 strike?
Well, the probabilities are very high that they would be blown to bits. It is the most obvious, earth-shaking, bone-rattling activity that anyone can imagine.
Not surprisingly, SOG is believed to have endured the most heavy casualties of any unit of the entire war. Former team leader John Plaster still wonders about the fate of his friend Pete Wilson, also known as Fat Albert. In an act of courage, he stayed behind to aid a wounded team member.
Rather than risk his whole team, he sent everyone else ahead, and he stayed behind with that yard. And the last anybody ever heard of Fat Albert. The last thing ever heard was his voice on his emergency radio, calling Mayday.
Plaster believes Pete Wilson was captured. But with the revelation that it was paramount that SOG members not be captured alive by the enemy, questions still linger about his ultimate fate. Only today, 30 years later, is the real story of SOG starting to be told. A secret war. Soldiers used intentionally as bait. Americans caught in American airstrikes. Chemical agents used in combat. A legacy of pride and a legacy of grief.